The guy in custody, Richard Allen, is he the only person being looked at in this investigation?
Right now, he's the one that's been that's now facing murder charges. So, again, we are not going to stop looking at other people until this is completely done and we have nothing left to do.
February 13, 2017, Abby Williams and Libby German went for a hike on the Monon High Bridge. They were supposed to meet a family member to be picked up later that day, but they never showed up.
For her to go, this long without communication on any kind of social media, even on Facebook, she's always posting something or talking to her friends. But going this long is just not typical at all for her. Something is astray.
The girls were reported missing, and hundreds of volunteers signed up to help find them.
If one of my kids were missing like this, I'd be out searching all night.
We're not stopping until she's home. That's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing.
Searches continued the next morning. Around 12 p.m. on February 14th, a search team found 2 bodies. The next day, they were confirmed to be Abby and Libby. State police began investigating this as a double homicide.
We have nobody in custody at this time. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, there is somebody out there that did this horrendous crime.
They released multiple clues over the years, including a picture, audio, and video from Libby's phone.
Despite the video and audio evidence that investigators had due to Libby's brave recording of the person known as Bridge Guy, this case went on for 5 years without a single arrest related to the murders of Abby or Libby. Before we begin to document the trial of Richard Allen, let's listen to one more soundbite from Superintendent of Indiana State Police at the time of the crime, Doug Carter. He describes this crime as being highly complex.
This case is unlike any that I've seen in almost a 40-year career. So there are so many different tentacles to this. It's very complex.
The very first witness presented at trial was Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother.
She's the grandmother of Liberty German, and she told jurors about the day in February of 2017 when her granddaughter Libby and her best friend Abby Williams went for a light hike along the Monon High Bridge Trail outside of Delphi, and they were later abducted and found slain the next day.
One of my friends that was with me hunting, her husband was in another group that was going along on the south side of the creek. He called his wife, and then she come running out and said, "Hey, they found him, they found him." I remember looking over saying, "Are they okay?" I hadn't, and she wouldn't answer me.
The families of Abby Williams and Libby German arrived just before 8 a.m. And Allen's family is there too, as a dozen jurors and 4 alternates listened to opening statements of the state and the defense. Prosecutor Nicholas McLeland went first and over the course of 20 minutes told jurors that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, the man who stalked Libby and Abby on the bridge that day, whose image was captured on Libby's phone. And he matches the description of a man seen on the Monon High Bridge in the minutes just before the girls were abducted. That Allen has confessed, and he knew details that only the killer would know, and investigators found a bullet that matches Allen's gun at the site where the girls' bodies were discovered. Defense attorney Andrew Baldwin countered that the witness descriptions are inconsistent. Allen suffered a mental health crisis that led to false confessions, the bullet testing was inconclusive, and that the girls were likely abducted on Monday afternoon, driven away from the bridge, killed elsewhere, and their bodies were placed not far from the banks of Deer Creek early Tuesday morning, several hours before they were found. Becky Patty told jurors that this week state police sought a DNA sample to be matched to a strand of hair found in Abby's hand at the crime scene. More than 7.5 years after the evidence was discovered, the defense says that's an example of a slipshod investigation.
We want to talk about what's going to be unfolding in court this morning, especially pertaining to the 2 sketches. So we want to get into this response that we received. The defense's response to the prosecution's request to have the 2 original sketches, if we could pull those up on the screen there, excluded from the trial. The defense, of course, wants them in, stating that they are highly relevant, and we want to especially talk about number 6 and number 7 in this document we received. To the extent that the sketches do not resemble Richard Allen, they are, quote, highly highly relevant. Now, Max, let's talk about the background of these sketches. What does this mean, and how does this change things today?
Yeah, so the sketches were released during this investigation. Obviously, we just had an arrest 2 years ago, so we went 5+ years of police investigating this. One of those sketches came earlier on in the investigation. The second one, it looks extremely different from the first one. It was almost shocking, I remember, when they released this sketch, because it looked nothing like the person that they had been, saying they were looking for all those years.
Another piece of information that was learned for the first time by many is that law enforcement actually had 4 composite sketches of Bridge Guy. As you see here, number 1 and 2 were released to the public. 3 and 4 were never released to the public, asking the public to look for the person depicted in the composite sketch.
I've seen him in court 4 days this week. He is clean shaven. He's looking a little bit healthier. He is more engaged with his attorneys, and also, specifically and importantly, he's not in jail fatigues and handcuffs.
Among the key takeaways in the opening statements was that there was a hair found in the hand of Libby German. Of course, DNA testing was done on that, and it belonged to a female, not a male, not the person who committed the crime.
Defense revealing that the hair that they had referred to earlier in the week is the hair of a female and might be a relative of one of the victims was important. And I think they also showed that the thrust of the defense looks like it is going to rely heavily on maybe tower data and cell data for locations of their client, Mr. Allen.
In what will be the first of several Saturday half sessions, jurors heard from 3 witnesses, the former police chief of Delphi and 2 searchers who went out to find the girls who were missing after taking a Monday afternoon walk along the Monon High Bridge outside of town. When Abby and Libby took a day off from school to walk the Monon High Bridge, some 60 feet above Deer Creek on February 13, 2017, they were accosted by Bridge Guy, captured here on video from Libby's cell phone, who ordered the girls. Investigators say Bridge Guy followed Libby and Abby to the south end of the Monon High Bridge, where they were forced down to the creek bed. Searcher Jacob Johns testified that he walked the south side banks of Deer Creek for hours Tuesday morning until, after passing under the bridge, he described another searcher spotted possible footprints and disturbed rocks leading down the incline to the creek side, as if someone had scrambled down the hill. Then Johns and Shane Hapgood found a tie-dyed shirt belonging to one of the girls hung up on tree roots in the creek. Meanwhile, another witness, Pat Brown, told jurors that he received word that something had been found in the creek. So he started walking south from Morning Heights Cemetery on the creek's north side when he stumbled on the site of the girls' bodies. I thought they were mannequins, he told jurors, and then as his voice cracked, Brown testified he called out to the other searchers, "We found them." Brown said he then called Delphi police with his find and turned his back on the scene. Witnesses are expected to testify that they saw a man who wore clothes similar to Allen's that day, who was walking along a nearby country road with pants that appeared either muddy, like he had been in a creek, or bloody, as if he had just committed a crime. In giving the jurors the day off just before noon, Judge Gulls said they should plan on a lengthy witness when they first come back to work Monday morning, which may be an indication that that first witness will probably be a law enforcement officer who will detail for the jury on how he first arrived on the scene and then secured that scene where the bodies of the girls were found. In Delphi, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 News.
And we start first at 4 with an emotional day at the Carroll County Courthouse. Jurors hearing graphic details about the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German in Delphi almost 8 years ago. Thanks for joining us here first at 4. I'm Nick McGill.
And I'm Birshel Edmay in for Aaliyah this afternoon. Now the attorney's taking the jury into the crime scene through police photos and some new details. And Fox 59's Russ McQuaid was in that courtroom this morning when this evidence was shared for the first time.
And good afternoon. You know, the jurors and the public and the reporters have never seen these photos before. The families have, and so has the defense team of Richard Allen, but seeing those photos really brings home the horror that must have occurred on that riverbank on February 13th and or 14th in 2017 when Abby Williams and Libby German were murdered. And the defense, in a contentious cross-examination this afternoon of a state police crime scene investigator, said, if you were so busy out there taking so many photos of those bodies, why didn't you take a photo of the recovery of the bullet that you say links our client to these killings. The families of Abby and Libby arrived at court this morning, as did attorneys representing Richard Allen. This is Allen's family outside the courthouse during a lunch break. Special Judge Fran Gull presided over testimony offered by the first Carroll County Sheriff's deputy who arrived on the scene and choked up as he described finding the bodies of Libby and Abby in a rolling floodplain less than 20 yards off the north bank of Deer Creek. Then an Indiana State Police crime scene investigator narrated some 40 photographs he took of the woods that day, including close-up depictions of the two girls, one portraying the wounds to Libby's nude body, the other showing Abby just a few feet away, wearing her friend's clothes, damp as if the children had been forced across the creek before being killed, and covered with sticks. Now, during cross-examination this afternoon, the state police crime scene investigators said, no, we did not take those sticks as evidence because, frankly, we've never been able to recover DNA off of any rough natural wood surface such as that. Meanwhile, that same investigator was cross-examined by defense attorney Bradley Rosie, who said, if you're going to document this scene, how do we know where this bullet came from and that we have no video or photographic evidence of you pulling that bullet out of the ground? That bullet is key to claiming that my client committed those murders, because now the defense calls that the magic bullet, which they will later challenge with their own ballistics expert, who will have doubts about whether that bullet came from the gun of Richard Allen.
All right, Russ McQuaid in Carroll County, thank you so much. Now, we do know that one significant motion filed today was about the video taken on Libby's phone.
Investigators have long said this may show the killer giving orders to the girls.
Now, prosecutors argue that Richard Allen looks like the man in the video, but his defense argues it's too grainy to tell, and they believe having anyone testify over the video or audio would be, in their eyes, speculation.
Angela, Zach, good morning. Three among several major takeaways from yesterday's tough session in court include the introduction of over 40 graphic crime scene photos depicting the manner in which Abby and Libby's bodies were found, questions surrounding the alleged bullet found at the crime scene, and the way investigators say sticks and branches were placed on the girls. The session included testimony from Carroll County Sheriff's Deputy Darren Giancola, who was the first deputy to arrive at the scene, and Sergeant Jason Page, a crime scene investigator with the Indiana State Police. The crime scene photos included shots of the general area, as well as close-ups of both Abby Williams and Libby German. Now, here are some observations from our reporter Russ McQuaid, who was in the courtroom yesterday. Now, we do want to warn you that the details are disturbing. In the images, Abby was dressed, Libby was not. Abby's clothing appeared to be damp in the photos, which was later reiterated by both Giancola and Page, who recalled that detail from the scene. Bloodstains were visible on both of the girls, the ground, and the surrounding trees. Both girls had their throats slit, with Abby's body positioned 3 to 5 feet away from Libby's. Both girls had tree branches placed on top of them that appeared to be set in a V or a cross-shaped pattern. Now, McQuaid says some of the branches were large, with a large tree limb seen on Libby's left shoulder. McQuaid also noted that Richard Allen, the man charged with 4 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of the girls, showed no significant reaction to the photos in his opinion. Now, meantime, during the afternoon session, defense attorney Brad Rosie went hard on crime scene investigators who said they found a bullet at the crime scene that was later linked to Richard Allen. Now, that bullet was a key piece of evidence leading to Allen's eventual arrest. However, there were no photos taken of the removal of the bullet at the crime scene, leading the defense to doubt what they call the magic bullet. Investigators also didn't immediately collect the sticks from the girls' bodies, stating that they've never gotten a good hit of DNA from such a surface. Now, one investigator did say, however, that the sticks were entered into evidence 2 days later after they were told to go back.
Hey, Russ.
Hey, good afternoon. An Indiana State Police video and audio technician said it was his job to enhance the video captured on Libby German's cell phone on February 13th, 2017, the day Libby and her best friend, Abby Williams, were abducted and killed near the Monon High Bridge outside of Delphi. Technician Jeremy Chapman was asked, when you look at that video, what do you see? His answer was, quote, 2 girls and a guy walking on a bridge. is the prosecution's contention that a suspect who's come to be known as Bridge Guy, his image captured on Libby's cell phone, is the killer of the two girls who were walking along the Monon High Bridge on a day off from school. For the first time, we have a more complete version of that video shown in court this afternoon. We've seen and heard only snippets before, but today prosecutors played 43 seconds of the video. In it, you can see in the distance a man walking on the bridge and Abby in a red shirt. We hear the voice of the man commanding the girls, quote, "Guys, down the hill." Abby rushes past Libby's cell phone camera, which is pointed to the ground and showing railroad tracks and a gravel path. We hear Libby saying, as if she's responding to a directive, "There's no path here. We've got to go down here," before descending toward the south side bank of Deer Creek. The girls' bodies were found the next day across the creek, some of their clothes in the water, Abby wearing Libby's clothes that were also wet. During the first playing of that tape, Richard Allen, sitting at the defense table, looked plaintively back at his wife Kathy, who was sitting in the row in front of me in the courtroom. Earlier, jurors were shown bags of evidence containing not only those wet clothes, which have since dried, obviously, but also the bullet investigators said they recovered from the location of the bodies that the state claims Richard Allen and his gun, links Richard Allen and his gun to the killings. Our Max Lewis is still up in the courtroom at this hour. When court is dismissed for the day, he will be among a small number of reporters who will get a chance to look at the evidence that was revealed in court during this session, which hopefully will include a better, more close-up, enhanced look at not only that videotape, all 43 seconds of it, but also a better chance to hear what was said between the girls and the killer.
Yeah, any further. Yeah. Also, for the first time today, we're getting a look at some of the documents and interviews that have been used in this investigation. Exhibits were shown to media in Fort Wayne courtroom today.
No cameras were allowed, but Fox 59's Eric Graves spent hours going through hundreds of pages, and he joins us now with a look at what stuck out to him today.
For the first time today, we got a look at Richard Allen's signed confessions to the Delphi double murders. Now, keep in mind, since there were no cameras allowed in the courtroom here behind me in Fort Wayne, this is a rough sketch of what that confession looked like on this Indiana Department of Corrections request for interview. You can see it says, "I am ready to officially confess for killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry," then signed with Richard Allen's signature and dated received March 5th, 2023. Now, we do know that Richard Allen has made more than 60 apparent confessions, some to crimes that never happened. Further, those exhibits showed that the Delphi Police Department had an audio DVR error. All of the audio recordings of interviews were taped over up to February 20th, 2017. That is a 6-day window after the girls' bodies were found and that investigation into the murders began. The exhibit did not list who those interviews that were taped over were with. On the defense's side of things, those exhibits, more than 24 of them with hundreds of pages of documents, mostly went toward forming their theory around Odinism and that a group of Odinists were responsible for the killings of Abby and Libby. Multiple depositions and interview notes with people from Delphi and surrounding areas were made public to us today inside the courtroom, but Judge Gola has ordered that theory not be used in the trial happening right now. Further, many of those people that were named have not been mentioned publicly in any court documents or by police. We do expect to hear Richard Allen's confessions at some point during this trial from the prosecution. On the defense's side of things, they've continued to maintain that Richard Allen is an innocent man that was put under undue stress during his time behind bars.
In another case that's recently in the news, the Central Park Five all confessed to murder and were later exonerated after spending years in prison. So confessions don't stand alone. They have to be looked at in context.
Can you talk about how the attorneys are handling these theories about, well, maybe this was a ritualistic killing? The court saw photos of how the girls' bodies were posed yesterday and the tree branches that were arranged, perhaps in some sort of a pattern on top of them. Now, the defense isn't allowed to directly reference this theory about Odinism, but today they did ask some investigators what those arrangements might mean. What do you make of that, and what is the jury going to make of that, more importantly?
Well, while Odinism is out, the fact that the bodies were posed, they didn't lie as they fell, so to speak, and the fact that things were placed over them is not out, as long as you don't try to overtly connect it to Odinism. So what is the person doing? What are they consumed with? Why? What is the reason? And how could that be either connected or disconnected for Mr. Allen?
And we do know Odinism can be brought up in the state of appeal if it gets to that point. Yeah. So if it does, will yesterday in court play a big role in that? Those pictures that were identified as being placed, the questions perhaps about why certain things were placed. Does that then lend to the defense's hand should we get to the point where an appeal is necessary?
Yes, if you get to an appeal, pre-trial the judge had said everything they did on the hearing about Odinism is in the appellate record. So it's there and able to be discussed. And that means the Court of Appeals can compare what the jury would have heard with a different ruling versus what they actually did hear.
There was also a lot of back and forth about that unspent round that was recovered from the scene and connected to Richard Allen's gun. In your experience, though, how is that type of ballistic evidence accepted in most trials?
Well, tool mark evidence isn't that persuasive. It needs to be supported by other things. It basically says these might come from the same source, but it doesn't mean they did come from the same source. Many firearms leave very similar tool marks, so we'll have to wait and see how conclusive that witness is when he tries to testify about a match or a prospective match.
And then the revelation from the defense, or at least their contention, that wasn't cataloged they didn't take a picture of it, right, and it wasn't cataloged as maybe extensively as they contended should have. Does that play in their favor as well?
It certainly does, because with modern photography, you can take high definition pictures of the actual tool marks, and all those officers know that tool marks are going to be compared. So being able to show, here's how it was in the field on the day we found it, and this tool mark matches that tool mark from the round that was compared, is very important and can be very important to jurors.
It's one of the top questions I'm getting surrounds what people are calling the magic bullet. People are calling unspent bullet. It is one of the focuses of this case. The prosecutors claim that a bullet investigators found between murder victims Abby Williams and Libby German, they say they know that it came from a gun owned by the suspect Richard Allen.
Nick? Now, Richard Allen's defense team is making another bid to revive their theory that the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German were part of a pagan ritual. Crime scene photos show tree branches arranged on and around the girls' bodies. Now, the defense says investigators have previously pursued the possibility that these sticks represent symbols of a white nationalist religion called Odinism. A crime scene investigator took the stand Tuesday and said he believed the branches were meant to conceal the girls' bodies. Allen's team says it has an expert who has testified before in favor of the Odinism theory, and they claim that Allen has a constitutional right to present that alternate explanation. Today's filing includes the argument that, quote, using a person's own eyeballs, common sense, logic, and reason, they can say it's clear the branches were not concealing the bodies. Judge Frankel has denied every request so far to have the Odinism theories presented at trial. This motion will be in her hands as well.
And good afternoon, Dan. Indiana State Police First Sergeant Chris Cecil took the stand this afternoon, and it was his job to examine Libby German's cell phone. You know the cell phone, the one she was carrying on February 13th, 2017, as she and Abby Williams were walking across the Monon High Bridge, and she captured video of bridge guys stalking them off the end of the bridge. And it was Cecil's job to explain to jurors what data in that cell phone tells us about the last minutes of the girls' lives. The jurors listened to some highly technical information that came from First Sergeant Chris Cecil of the Indiana State Police as he testified that analysis of cell phone data puts Libby and Abby on the Monon High Bridge at 2:05 p.m. that afternoon. At 2:14 p.m., Libby shot video of her friend on the bridge, and in the distance, the man known as Bridge Guy, the girl's killer. That video runs for 43 seconds. We can see Bridge Guy, perhaps even hear his voice, as well as that of Libby, seemingly responding to his orders as she says, "We've got to go down here." At 2:31 p.m., an app on the phone records a change in the phone's elevation, likely meaning that was as the girls were being marched either down to Deer Creek or up the opposite bank, where their bodies were found the next day. After 2:39 p.m., that phone, later discovered under Abby's body, never moves again. At 4:06 p.m. that afternoon, a text message came in from Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty. It read, "You need to call me now." Within 6 hours, the phone ran out of power, though it briefly spiked on at 4:30 a.m. on the morning of February 14th, and that was about 8 hours after the girls' bodies were found. Earlier today, jurors heard from Sarah Carbaugh. She's a local woman who said she was driving on County Road 300 North that afternoon about 4 o'clock, and she saw Bridge Guy walking down the road. She said his clothes were covered with mud and perhaps even some blood down on his ankles. The jury also heard from the pathologist who conducted the autopsies on the girls' bodies 2 days later, and he determined that they both died of slashing stab wounds across their throats, but there was no evidence of any sexual assault injuries to either girl.
Russ, thank you so much. A lot of disturbing details today. We know you also heard from a pathologist about the girls' autopsies. What did we learn today about the weapons used in their murders?
There was some speculation, some difference of opinion at the start, but as we found out, both of those proposals, those plans, those options on what type of knife was used came from the same pathologist. He explained that early on he noted that Libby had kind of serrated cuts on her throat, whereas Abby had more of straight line cuts on her throat, but he then later changed his mind in another report and reported back to prosecutors that perhaps on second thought, maybe that wasn't a serrated cut on Libby's throat, maybe that was also created with a box cutter. It's interesting to note that as part of the autopsies, he determined both girls were approximately 5'4" inches tall. Abby at 95 pounds, Libby at 200 pounds. Richard Allen himself is about 5'4", 5'5", and 155 pounds.
Fox 59's Kit Hanley has the specifics on the timeline and the shocking information that was revealed. Kit, good morning.
Yeah, Angela, Daniel, good morning. We have a lot to walk through before the first session starts today. Now, jurors heard from Sergeant Chris Cecil after the lunch break yesterday. He's an Indiana State Police digital forensics examiner. Cecil was the person in charge of examining Libby's cell phone, the same cell phone that produced the infamous Down the Hill audio clip that was played for jurors on Tuesday. Now, Cecil also talked about seizing and reviewing all of Richard Allen's 23 devices in 2022, stating that there was nothing on any of them that connected Allen to Libby, Abby, or their murders. However, the phone he had in 2017 could not be found. During family testimony, it was noted that Abby did not own a cell phone at the time of her death, and that Libby's phone ended up being found underneath Abby's dead body. Cecil told the jurors that investigators used cell phone towers to ping the phone. Now, we want to walk you through the timeline of the data that was shared in court. Cecil confirmed Libby's cell phone was on the Monon High Bridge at 2:05 p.m. Then at 2:13 and 51 seconds, Abby took the Bridge Guy video that captures a man walking behind the girls and telling them, quote, "Guys down the hill." Fast forward to 2:31 and the cell phone records a change in latitude, altitude, and elevation. Cecil explained that meant the girls were on the move as they were reportedly led down a hill and possibly across Deer Creek. Then at 2:32 and 39 seconds, the phone never records a move again. Now, Cecil originally told jurors the phone died at 10:32 p.m. and spiked again at 4:34 the next morning, receiving text messages. One of those messages read, "Call me now," and it was from Libby's grandmother. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing here because later Cecil retracted that statement and said he believes the phone stayed on until 4:34, that it did not die at 10:32. Cecil said he didn't know why there was no movement between those hours, leaving many questions about the period of inactivity. However, that lack of movement goes against the defense team's theory that there may have been an abduction and off-site killing. Now, Cecil noted that the phone was turned on by investigators at 3:06 p.m. on February 15th, and that's over 24 hours after the girls' bodies were reportedly found, as they were found shortly after noon on February 14th.
And this involves the former prosecutor of Carroll County.
Yeah, let's take you back here now that we've just learned, because these were just filed about less than an hour ago. So the defense for Richard Allen wants to talk to the former prosecutor of Carroll County, who you see right there. His name is Robert Ives. He was last prosecutor at the very end of 2017. And now, for some reason, as of Tuesday, the defense, again, for Richard Allen has said, hey, we want to put him on the stand and we want him to testify in this case. Now, the question is, why now, and why did they just send this 2 days ago?
And we should also say that Mr. Ives' last day of being a prosecutor for Carroll County was the same year the girls were found murdered. But this was December 31st of 2017. My question for you, Ange, how interesting is this for the defense team to call the former prosecutor of Carroll County?
Yeah, something that we would typically, maybe not that, maybe pretty rare, it would seem. I think it's important to note here that he now has an attorney, the former prosecutor does. They have filed a motion to quash the subpoena, meaning they're saying he should not have to testify. They do not want him to testify, meaning Robert Ives does not want to, saying that this is my work product.
Right.
I shouldn't have to go on the stand and testify in this case, saying basically that this was clearly my work product, which is something that is not discoverable, nor is Ives able to testify regarding any work product. They say he is not a fact witness. Anything that he would be able to say would be purely speculative, irrelevant, and inadmissible in this.
Today, he was named not as a suspect, but as a man who was also walking on that trail on February 13th, 2017.
Yeah, court remains in session for the afternoon, but Fox 59's Max Lewis just walked outside in the last few minutes. Max, we had an eventful morning here. What did you hear this afternoon?
Yeah, so this afternoon we finished up the testimony of Steve Mullen, who formerly was the Delphi police chief, but was now is the investigator for the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office. He is important. He's testified, actually, this is his third time taking the stand. He testified about getting the tip originally. We'll get to that in just a second, but getting the tip that Richard Allen came forward to police and said he was on the bridge that day sometime between 1:30 and 3:30. Then he talked about going to Richard Allen's home, speaking with him, and then interviewing Richard Allen for the first time. During that interview, Richard Allen agreed to be interviewed by them, and then came and basically they said that he became agitated during this interview. Once they started pressing him about certain details of the crime, he then left the room. And then we heard from Sheriff Tony Liggett this afternoon, who was not at the time was sheriff, but was chief deputy when Richard Allen was arrested in 2022. Some of the big testimonies from that really came on the search warrant, because he wrote the search warrant that they eventually got them into Richard Allen's home, where they found the gun that they say they have tied to the bullet. I will say some of the big things from that, though, is that during cross-examination, they asked Tony Liggett, there is no DNA evidence connecting him to the crime scene. Tony Liggett answered, none. They then said there was a lot of digital evidence collected in this case, and there is no evidence that connects Allen to the scene, right? And he said, yes. And then he said that was interesting, because he said he was on the phone at the time. He described himself being on the trail at the phone. That was sort of the big highlight from today. Excuse me while I look through my notes here. And then they were also talking about just the facts of how he got that search warrant, because you might remember in that search warrant were descriptions of quote-unquote bridge guy from eyewitnesses, which we have reviewed in the past couple of days. We've heard testimony from all those eyewitnesses and some of the inconsistencies in their statements. This morning, though, we heard from Kathy Shank, who was the woman who basically started this entire thing, because she was employed as a secretary at the Unified Command, the task force that was set up to investigate the Delphi murders. She was going through tips one day. They were actually having to move offices, and she says that in a box in a desk drawer, she found a tip lead on it that basically said Richard Allen, and said that he had come forward and said he'd be on the bridge that day between 1 and 3 o'clock. She said that matched up with the timeline that she knew, the facts of the case. So she forwarded it on to the investigators, and of course all of this has now happened after that. During cross-examination, there was not a lot of questions for her necessarily, but she did say that she did not know how that tip ended up in that box. Now, that tip was actually prepared by a conservation officer who was helping out with the investigation in the early days. He then testified after that. His name was Dan Doolin. Basically talked about doing the first interview with Richard Allen. They did it in a grocery store parking lot. He was following up on the tip because Richard Allen came forward voluntarily with this information, saying he was on the bridge that day. Doolin did the initial interview and took down the information, but didn't really, there wasn't anything that extremely stood out to Doolin. He did mark it for follow-up, but nobody ever followed up on it, apparently. He testified that then in 2022, when the tip resurfaced, he was called. He did some investigating into Richard Allen at the time in 2022, when they had just seen this tip, they were looking into him. The interesting thing from his testimony was that he looked through fishing licenses, actually, because he's with the DNR, and a fishing license Richard Allen had applied for between 2016 and 2017. He changed his height for some reason from being 5'4" to 5'6". Height is very important in this case because a lot of the witnesses had described Bridge Guy as being tall. If you see Richard Allen in person, I'm 6 foot. He's quite a bit shorter than I am. He is much shorter. So the defense is trying to point out just overall inconsistencies in eyewitness statements of Bridge Guy and how Richard Allen looks like. I did leave court. Sheriff Tony Liggett stepped down from the stand. We're not exactly sure who is going to be coming up next. However, I did appear to learn because defense attorney Brad Rosie started to ask Tony Liggett about the analysis of the bullet, remember, that was found between the two girls' bodies. Prosecutor McClellan objected. Brad Rosie said, yeah, you're right, we'll get to that tomorrow, which leads us to believe that the examiner who examined that bullet for the Indiana State Police could possibly testify tomorrow. That is going to be a huge testimony, as really was today. Sheriff Tony Liggett, we spent couple hours actually on his testimony. But we should be getting another update here within the next couple hours once court ends, and we'll bring that to you as soon as we get it, guys.
Thank you very much, Max. No DNA, no digital evidence linking Richard Allen to the scene from the current sheriff. That's what he told in court today. Max reported.
The prosecution calls more witnesses to the stand on day 6 of the Delphi double murders trial.
Several witnesses interviewed about a man they saw on the Monon High Bridge the day Abby and Libby were murdered. Another, the current Carroll County sheriff who took over for former Sheriff Toby Lesenby, days after a major break in this case.
And that break, the arrest of Richard Allen back in 2022. So many questions, though, sparked by today's testimony. So let's get live now to Russ McQuaid, who's there in Carroll County for the latest on everything that happened there in court today. Russ, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dan and Beershell. Well, after a slow start, today's the day when the prosecution's case against Richard Allen for the murders of Libby German and Abby Williams in 2017 began to come together. It started this morning with Kathy Shank. She was an administrative assistant. She spent many years taking all of the written files, the interviews, plugging them into a data system when all of a sudden in September of 2022, she's going through the files. She pulls one out and goes, hey, this doesn't look right. It's a file of an interview done in 2017 with a man identified as Rick Allen Whiteman. His name's Richard Allen, but he lives on Whiteman Drive. It's misfiled. She looks at it. She goes, hey, this guy admits he was on the bridge that day walking on the trail. She takes it to Liggett, Tony Liggett. He was the chief investigator back then, says, you need to look at this. Then we heard from the law enforcement officer who did that original interview in 2017. It was only 4 or 5 days after the girls' bodies were discovered in February, and Richard Allen self-reported, called up and said, I want to talk to a law enforcement officer. Hey, I was on the bridge that day. Ask me any question. Maybe people saw me up there. Here I am. This is how you find me. So the DNR officer wrote down that information, and significantly, he wrote down Allen's cell phone and its registration, its serial number. That interview is lost for years till it pops up in September of 22. Then within the next month, in October of 22, October 13th, investigators bring in Richard Allen, sit him down, show him a picture of Bridge Guy and say, "We think you're Bridge Guy, you killed these girls." He said, "No way, that's not me, I'm out of here." Later that day, investigators, state police, go back to Richard Allen's home on Whiteman Drive, and they start doing a search. And in that search, they find several knives. Investigators say knives were used to kill the girls. They find a .40 caliber gun, and they find a bullet that they say matches a bullet that was found at the murder scene. Lieutenant Jerry Holman is sitting in a car in Richard Allen's driveway while they're doing a search inside, and he goes, "Hey, if we tear up your house, tear up your drywall, we'll fill out a form. Don't worry, we'll repair your house." He says, Richard Allen says to him, "Why bother? It's all over." Later, when he says, "Do you want me to take you to your wife?" Richard Allen says to him again, allegedly, "Why bother? It's all over." It's important to remember, Richard Allen had already been told earlier in the day he was a suspect and was advised of his Miranda rights. It was at that time the investigation then really honed in on Richard Allen, who within 10 days or so was in custody and charged with these murders. The pushback from the defense to Lieutenant Holman on the stand later this afternoon was, "Did you record that interview? Don't you usually record your interviews? We've only got your word that says he said this. There's no proof he said that." That's where we wrapped up testimony just about an hour ago here in Carroll County.
Okay, Russ, thank you. Now, Allen's arrest, which happened right before the election in 2022, was something that was also noted. The timeline, that timeline also noted today in court.
So how did the witness and jury really react to that insinuation that the arrest was perhaps politically motivated rather than a true lead in what had been at that time pretty much a cold case?
I don't think the jury has any reaction to that at all. They're probably thinking this sounds like Carroll County politics, but this is another stone of the foundation the defense is trying to build towards a reasonable doubt verdict, which is if they can plant the seed, maybe Carroll County authorities were so desperate to get a suspect and to nail this down, get an arrest, and it just so happened to fall into place with this mystery interview that comes out of nowhere in the last 6 weeks or so before the November election, when Tony Liggett is eventually elected sheriff after he's been in charge of this case for all these years. Then you add it up with some of the other information the defense is trying to bring out. We're finding out about parts of interviews that are missing, evidence that wasn't collected. There's a lot of building blocks that the defense will attempt to use to show the jurors that if it comes down to a 50-50 split, he did it, he didn't do it, maybe insinuating that the investigation was slipshod from the start and missed a lot of parts over 7.5 years. That might be the one part that convinces at least some jurors to go, you know what, maybe they got him, but this was such a ragged operation. How can we be sure that they've got the right man? Today is the day the prosecution's case finally started to crystallize and come together in a Delphi courtroom in the murder case of Richard Allen, accused of killing Abby Williams and Libby German in 2017. And at one point late this afternoon, State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman said during a search warrant of his house in 2022, Richard Allen turned to him and said, "It doesn't matter, it's over." Maybe, says the prosecution, maybe that insinuates some guilt for the murders of those girls. But first of all, Max Lewis, you got to figure out, how did the investigators, after 5.5 years of treading water and spinning their wheels, suddenly in September and October of 2022 latch on to Richard Allen?
Yeah, and that began really the week the girls were murdered, because that is when Richard Allen came forward and gave a tip saying that he was on the trails that day from about 1:30 in the afternoon to about 3:30 in the afternoon. And then after that, he was interviewed by a conservation officer who took his statement, prepared the report, and filed that report, but that report did not turn up again until 2022.
Two things about that report. One, that conservation agent wrote down the model and cell phone, the serial number of Richard Allen's cell phone he was carrying that day in 2017. And two, the report was misfiled under the name Rick Allen Whiteman. Of course, Whiteman's not his last name. That's the street he lives on, which is why it's misfiled in the system until a volunteer researcher digs it out in September of 22.
Yeah, and so it was misfiled not only, and also it was labeled cleared on it. warrant, which was another misfile as well. The big thing was Kathy Shank was her name, was the secretary who worked at the command post and was going through these tips. Said they were moving. She was cleaning out a drawer and one day found this tip and sent it right over to Tony Liggett, who was the lead investigator.
Tony Liggett was the lead investigator for the Carroll County Sheriff. Then he goes to the lead investigator for the prosecutor's office, a man named Steve Mullen, who at the time of the girls' deaths was actually the police chief here in Delphi. So Liggett and Mullen then on October 13th, 2022, they bring Richard Allen in for an interview.
Yeah, and they say that Richard Allen came with them very willingly. He was forthcoming. They Mirandized him during this interview, but things really took a turn at the very end when they put a picture of Bridge Guy before them, basically asking if this was him. The quote Richard Allen said was if the picture was taken on the girl's phone, it couldn't be me. After that, he ended the interview and they took him back home.
But it was a couple hours later when state troopers showed up at Richard Allen's home and began a search warrant. This afternoon, we heard from the detective, David Vito, who led that search warrant. He said in Richard Allen's house, we found clothes that looked like Bridge Guy's. We found his car, which we think was at the scene. We found knives. The girls were slashed to death. And we also found in his bedroom a .40 caliber gun and .40 caliber ammunition that looks like the same type of ammunition that was found at the crime scene, and they used that ammunition to link that gun to Richard Allen and to the murders. But what was really surprising is while this search warrant is going on, and as Max mentioned, he already been advised of his constitutional rights to keep silent. He's sitting in the car with Lieutenant Jerry Holman of the Indiana State Police, and Holman testified today that while he was talking to Richard Allen, at one point Richard Allen just looked at him and he said, "It doesn't matter, it's over." And Holman said he said that twice, perhaps insinuating that there was some guilt of mind there. The defense pushed back on that and said, you didn't record that. We just take your word that he said it. And the defense also asked Holman and Vito, did you find any DNA on a knife in his car or on his clothes that links him to the murder scene? And the answers were no.
Yeah, those were the same questions asked of Tony Liggett as well. Did you find anything that has DNA evidence that connects Richard Allen to the scene? The answer was no. Did you find any digital evidence that connects Richard Allen's to the scene? They said no. I think you listed off the things they found in there. What is equally important was the things they did not find, including the cell phone that Richard Allen had at the time the girls went missing. That was the one device of the 20-plus devices they seized that they did not find in his home, as well as they did not find any clothing of the girls, because we learned today that there's pieces of clothing missing from the scene that have still not been found to this day.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for today. Tomorrow we're back at it again. Next, I think we're going to hear from some bullet extraction experts that are going to try to match the bullet that was found at the crime scene with the gun at Richard Allen's house, and we'll be right back at it. For Max Lewis, I'm Russ McQuaid reporting from Delphi.
Today, day 7 in the Delphi murders trial. Yesterday, we learned more about how prosecutors landed on Richard Allen as their suspect.
There was little movement in the investigation for 5.5 years. So how did they land on Allen? Fox 59's Charles Benberry is here now with more on how he became the focus. Charles?
Well, Lindy, for the first time, Richard Allen was pointed out to the jury in the courtroom yesterday, not as the suspected Delphi double killer, but as the man who admitted to being on the Monon High Bridge Trail the day Abby Williams and Libby German were killed. Now, jurors heard from Kathy Shank, a volunteer who spent years entering tips and reports into the investigative file system. She testified that on September 21st, 2022, she found a summary of Allen's interview stuffed into a file folder. Shank told the jurors she pulled out the report, read it, saw the name Richard Allen Whiteman, and that he admitted to being on the bridge that day. She recognized the clerical error in his name and took the report to Carroll County's lead investigator, Tony Liggett, who was running for sheriff at the time. She also said an original tip sheet from 2017 with Allen's information on it also included the word cleared. Within 5 weeks of Shank's discovery of the misfiled report, Richard Allen was in jail and charged with the murders. Now, also testifying was Steve Mullen, the former Delphi police chief who went on to become an investigator for the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office. He testified on Saturday about the early days of the case. He said he received paperwork about Richard Allen on September 21st, 2022, the same day Shank flagged the report. Mullen spoke with Doolin about the 2017 report and discovered no one had followed up on Allen. He did some additional research and found Allen had 2 vehicles registered to him, a 2006 Ford 500 and a 2016 Ford Focus. Mullen went to retrieve video from the Hoosier Harvest store to see if Allen drove by there. He told the court he saw a vehicle entering the frame that matched Allen's vehicle around 1:27 p.m. Now, although Mullen couldn't see the license plate or the driver in the video, he said the car looked like Allen's and the rims were similar. Now, 2 notes that came up about Allen's circumstances in the late winter, early spring of 2017 was that investigators say they can't find the cell phone he was using back then, and then DNR Captain Dan Doolin testified 6 weeks after the killing. The height on Allen's fishing license was increased 2 inches to 5'6", and his weight also listed was increased.
Day 7 included prosecutors bringing out their strongest piece of physical evidence. Thanks for joining us here first at 4. I'm Nick McGill.
And I'm Birshal Edmeh in for Leah. An unfired .40 caliber round took center stage here. And today the jury heard the testimony of an Indiana State Firearms police officer and expert. Fox 59's Russ McQuaid was in the courtroom once again all day long, and he's joining us now live from Delphi.
Yeah, Russ, the defense is promising to challenge that evidence and that expert, correct?
That's what we spent all day in court doing, Nick and Birshal. Yes, all afternoon, virtually all day, but especially all afternoon. A former Indiana State Police forensic firearms examiner has been on the witness stand explaining and then defending her finding that the bullet found near the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German in 2017 on the banks of Deer Creek east of Delphi came from the gun of Richard Allen. The bullet, basically unfired and essentially pristine, was found nose down in the dirt where the girls' bodies lay. Former firearms examiner Melissa Oberg immediately identified 3 marks on the base of the bullet, ejection marks that were left after the round was ejected, unfired from the killer's gun. When Indiana State Police troopers searched Richard Allen's house in 2022, they found a .40 caliber handgun, which Oberg said she test fired, and she said those rounds convinced her to a degree of, quote, sufficient agreement that the 2017 crime scene bullet came from Richard Allen's gun. Defense attorney Bradley Rosie argued with Oberg about the accuracy of forensic bullet examination, and specifically if those fired bullets perfectly matched the unfired cartridge, which she matched to Allen's gun. Said the forensic examiner, quote, an ejection mark is an ejection mark. Some surprises that also came out during today's testimony: over the last 7.5 years, Indiana State Police troopers have confiscated and had the lab test 8 different guns. 3 of them were in the month of February 2017. Another 4 of them came out of the Wabash River in the summer of 2022. And of course, that 8th gun would be Richard Allen's gun. The testimony continues this afternoon inside the Carroll County Courthouse. Our co-anchor Max Lewis is still inside that courtroom, and when he comes out, we will bring you the absolute latest. Live in Delphi, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 News.
And Tompkins says the prosecution's bullet evidence and how detectives linked it to Richard Allen's gun should be up for debate.
If the bullet found at the crime scene next to the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German in 2017 is the state's best evidence linking Richard Allen to those killings, a veteran Indianapolis defense attorney says jurors ought to take a skeptical look at the tests that came to that conclusion. This is our artist's rendition of a photograph jurors saw depicting the unspent bullet found in the dirt at the crime scene. Notice the 3 red marks on the lower left quadrant. Those are the marks the state says came from a gun discovered in Richard Allen's house during the execution of a search warrant 2 years ago, 5.5 years after Libby and Abby were found dead on the north bank of Deer Creek below the Monon High Bridge. The state theorizes Allen had a gun with him that day and may have racked 1 bullet out of the chamber at the murder scene, perhaps to scare the girls. A former Indiana State Police firearms forensic examiner said she tested 8 guns for investigators over the course of 5 years and found a match only with Allen's .40 caliber handgun. but not the way detectives say he used the gun that day, performing a dry cycle, ejecting the bullet from the chamber. Melissa Oberg told jurors the first 6 times she ejected a bullet from Allen's gun, she couldn't get the same marks on the base of the bullet as the bullet that was found in the woods. So she had to fire Allen's gun 4 times to get those same marks on 2 bullets that, of course, would have been destroyed by the firing process. Indianapolis defense attorney John Tompkins, who is not connected to the case, tells us not only would firing a test bullet change the composition of the comparison round, he thinks the examiner changed the rules of the game when she couldn't get an apples-to-apples match on comparing unspent cartridges. So she decided to use a fired round, which would possibly react differently than the unfired bullet that was found in the dirt.
And she's only doing it on this one firearm. So now we have double protocol testing on only the firearm that is going to go to trial. Did she go back with the other weapons that she dry cycled after the fact? They still had those weapons. Fire those and compare those to see if they match too. How much did she structure this final, quote, match just for this trial?
Oberg spent all day on the stand and was then dismissed, leaving it up to the defense when they get a chance to go before the jurors later in this trial to put on their own expert in an attempt to discredit the state's theory. In Delphi, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 Morning News.
Opening statements began last Friday, and since then, there have been a number of new developments. First, we learned there is no DNA, digital, or forensic evidence that links Richard Allen to the crime scene. Now, that's despite a piece of hair found in Abby's hand when her body was discovered. Then, jurors saw new video pulled from Libby's cell phone. The 43-second clip is an extended version of this bridge guy video you're seeing here. The new clip captured Libby telling the killer, quote, "We can't go down there." Libby's cell phone also provided new details on a potential timeline. Ping showed the girls at the bridge at 2:05 on that Monday. The bridge guy video was taken about 9 minutes later. Then at 2:31, the phone starts moving, recording a change in altitude, latitude, and elevation. Shortly after, at approximately 2:32, the phone never moves again. Then at 10:32, the phone reportedly powered down and woke again the next morning at 4:34. However, this is where it gets confusing because investigators then retracted that statement, saying the phone never died. And on Thursday, police revealed they found bullets, the gun in question, and a blue Carhartt jacket during a search of Richard Allen's home in 2022. Investigators say the jacket contained no DNA linking Allen to the crime scene.
We continue to cover the ongoing saga in Carroll County, where Day 8 of the Delphi murders trial wrapped up today. It was 2 years ago on this exact day that Richard Allen was arrested for the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German after a police interrogation. That interrogation was at the center of today's testimony, and our Russ McQuaid explains what happened.
This is the second time this week Lieutenant Jerry Holman has testified in front of this jury, and this is the second time this week the defense has poked holes in his account. Holman was the lead investigator of the investigation that began on February 14, 2017, a day after Libby German and Abby Williams disappeared while walking along the Monon High Bridge way above Deer Creek, and their bodies were found, their throats slashed on the creek's north bank. Holman admitted earlier this week that while he was with Allen as state troopers searched his home in October of 2022, that Allen said to him, quote, "It doesn't matter, it's over," though the conversation was never recorded, even though Allen was told he was a suspect and had already been read his Miranda rights. Then during Allen's arrest 2 years ago today, Holman admitted he lied to his suspect, telling him that experts identified his voice as Bridge Guy, the suspected killer captured on Libby's cell phone on the bridge as she and Abby were being abducted. More than 20 times, Allen denied being the killer and said, quote, "Take all your evidence and just arrest me," which Holman did. Defense attorney Andrew Baldwin chipped away at the credibility of the 7-year-long investigation and Holman's account. As the investigator admitted, there was no video of him reminding Allen of his right to remain silent the day he was arrested because, quote, "We had a lot of technical difficulties, and there's been mistakes made, yes." Holman also said for the first time in court that investigators believe Allen may have been interrupted during the abduction and murders because, quote, he may have heard somebody. Holman also said he may have misled fellow investigators with his mischaracterization of the accuracy of a firearms examiner's review of the bullet found at the crime scene that reportedly was linked to Richard Allen's gun. Before the jury was dismissed for the weekend, Judge Frangall told the panel that next week they will see videos of Richard Allen's heated exchanges with investigators. In Delphi, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 News. For 7 years, the road to justice for the murders of Abby and Libby has been rough, with a stalled investigation and some detours, and now courtroom testimony that has been both shocking and confusing. The state says Richard Allen is the man who walked the Monon High Bridge on February 13, 2017, and abducted best friends Abby Williams and Libby German, and led them to their deaths on the north bank of Deer Creek, their throats slashed, Libby disrobed, and Abby wearing her clothes. A woman told jurors she saw the suspected killer, Bridge Guy, all muddy, walking along a nearby country road about 90 minutes after the girls were murdered. Sarah Carbaugh never said the man she saw was Richard Allen, though she said a videotaped interview she did with police was lost. A former Indiana State Police forensics firearms investigator said an unspent bullet found near the bodies matched a round she fired from Richard Allen's gun, seized in October 2022 during a search warrant at his house, though no one has said if the found cartridge matches any other bullets that were discovered in Allen's house. Where on that day, State Police Lieutenant Jerry Holman said Allen told him, even after he was advised of his rights to remain silent, quote, "It doesn't matter, it's over," though Holman said he doesn't have a tape of Allen's alleged statement, or of his reminder to Allen about his Miranda rights when he was arrested 2 weeks later. And we'll see videotapes of Allen's conversations with investigators. We were also able to recreate a court-approved version of a confession note Allen supposedly wrote while inside a maximum security state prison awaiting trial. And the prosecution says it has more than 60 such confessions to show jurors. Even though Judge Frangall ruled out a defense request to show jurors 2 state police sketches derived from witness descriptions of men supposedly seen on the bridge trail that day, as they might confuse the jury because the sketches may not look like Richard Allen. But one witness inadvertently referred to a sketch in her testimony, and that could reopen the door for the defense to move to get the evidence back in. And even though Libby's cell phone on which she shot video of Bridge Guy was recovered and shown to jurors, police never found the phone Allen was using that day, though they seized nearly 24 other cell phones and pagers from his house. Perhaps what was most perplexing in the evidence and testimony that came out in the last week was the story of how Richard Allen's original 2017 interview, where he admitted being on the bridge that day, but that report was lost in the system for 5.5 years until it was found in a discarded desk, and a month later, Richard Allen was under arrest. In the newsroom, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 News.
Today has centered on the lack of DNA evidence connecting Richard Allen to the murders. Thanks for joining us here. First at 4, I'm Birshel Edme.
And I'm Eric Graves. Today is day 9 of testimony in the highly anticipated trial. Abby Williams and Libby German were found dead in Delphi in 2017. Today, the jurors saw the unspent round the prosecution says links Allen to the murders. Our Russ McQuaid and Max Lewis are both inside the Carroll County courtroom right now as we speak. But here's what we know so far from the courthouse today.
An Indiana State Police forensic scientist took the stand, and she analyzed the DNA evidence in this Delphi case, including rape kits on both girls. She testified that there was no DNA evidence showing the girls were sexually assaulted. She also says there's no DNA tying Allen to the murders. There was some minute male DNA presence detected on both girls under fingernails and other locations. But the analysts explained that could be due to clothing or otherwise naturally occurring from the girls' homes. The DNA sample was too small to provide a profile and did not come from Richard Allen.
The scientist also testified she examined the unfired .40 caliber Winchester Smith & Wesson cartridge found at the crime scene. She showed it to the jury. The analyst said the round tested negative for either DNA or fingerprints and said the state police crime lab no longer tests bullet cartridges due to its failure to capture results.
With Major Pat Cicero, he's of the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department. He is a blood spatter expert, and using crime scene photographs, he detailed for the jury and the families and the courtroom how he thinks the murders of Abby and Libby were accomplished on February 13th, 2017. Based on those photographs, and they were very close up and they were very graphic, he seems to indicate that Libby was slashed across the throat at a location up on the north side of Deer Creek, running under the Monon High Bridge, then dragged 20 feet to the north, then dragged another 20 feet to, I guess that would be the southwest, where she was found up against a tree. In the middle of that V pattern would have been her friend, Abby Williams. Abby, it would seem, was in what he said was the supine position. That would be laying on the ground, and also that perhaps since there was no blood on her sleeves or her hands, indicating that when she was fatally slashed across the throat, she did not automatically reach up and grasp her throat, that perhaps she was either unconscious or bound at the time of her injuries. And these majors said it would have taken perhaps 5 to 10 minutes for her to bleed out from those injuries. On the other hand, Libby had blood all over her hands, which would seem to indicate that her hands went to her throat as she was bleeding out. There were also indications of blood stains on trees near the vicinity there, within about 20 feet or so. Somehow, perhaps Libby's hand went up and rubbed on a tree. That was as yet undetermined. This was the first opportunity in the courtroom for many people to see such photographs. We've seen photographs from a distance, we've seen sketches, but these were the actual photographs of the crime scene that indicated the graphic and violent nature of the way these two young women died. And as I said, Bierschel and Eric, this was the first time a lot of people in those courtroom even saw those photographs.
And just as you are talking about it, I can hear all of us here taking a sigh, because to intake all of this physical gruesomeness is difficult, and I can only imagine for the families of these two girls that are there seeing and hearing this too, it's the same. Part of today, though, was also about this DNA and a lack of it. So now that we have an idea of their final moments, what is the prosecution or defense saying about the DNA that hasn't been found in any of this blood spatter or really any of the scene tied to Allen?
Well, that'll have to be significantly laid out, because we learned of the lack of DNA discovered not only at the crime scene on the victims, but also on items taken from Richard Allen's house, which include a coat that he owned back then, knives that he owned, also a swatch of carpeting taken from the car he would have been driving in 2017. None of them came back indicating any DNA evidence linking Richard Allen to these killings. But I've got to tell you, from sitting in that courtroom and just watching everybody in that courtroom, I was watching two jurors, an older man and an older woman. Frankly, the older man just couldn't, he wanted to get out of that courtroom. He refused to look up after a while at the big screen video monitor where the photographs were. I even caught him looking up at the clock in the courtroom, just wanting a break to get out of there. At one point just becoming resigned to what he was having to deal with, but he started packing up his folder and his ink pens, indicating he wanted to get out of there. The woman I saw, she covered her mouth with her hand, she looked down, she was covering her eyes. However, what was most distressing was at one point the Major Pat Cicero from the LaPorte County Sheriff's Department, as he reviewed the photographs, which were taken about 24 hours after the girls' deaths, he said what he noticed on one photograph was perhaps a drop of liquid on Libby's cheek, on her face. And the prosecutor asked, well, what would that indicate to you? And he says, well, let's assume that that's not a raindrop. Perhaps that is a tear on Libby's face from when she was dying. At that point, I was looking at Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother. She let out a small gasp. She hunched over. Her head was in her hands. She coughed a bit and dabbed her eyes. As you can see, this was very tough to view in that courtroom this afternoon. It was very emotional. And right up until about 4:15 is when Special Judge Fran Gull, in a very soft voice, announced to the jury she was taking a 15-minute break to give everybody in that courtroom a moment to compose themselves. It was dead silent in that courtroom as this evidence was being displayed for the jury.
And new information today in the Delphi double murders trial as the jury watches law enforcement interviews with the suspect, Richard Allen.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we're going to start in Delphi with new details we're learning now from Richard Allen's interviews from October of 2022. Thanks for joining us here first at 4. I'm Nick McGill.
And I'm Dan Spieler in for Aaliyah. Today the jury heard 2 videotaped police interviews and also from prison employees who say Allen confessed to the killings. Allen is charged with the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German, who were found dead in 2017. Fox 59's Russ McQuaid watched those interviews along with the jury, and he has new details today from court. Russ, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dan. It was on October 13th, 2022, 5.5 years after the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German were discovered near the Monon High Bridge, when detectives brought Richard Allen in for questioning. First, they Mirandized him, gave him his rights. They told him he was not a suspect in the killings, but within 90 minutes, it was obvious they thought they had their Delphi double killer. Within 2 weeks, he was under arrest, and within 6 months, apparently, Richard Allen agreed with them. The jurors watched 2 videotapes of Richard Allen freely signing away his right to remain silent and consult an attorney before he was told that witnesses put him in the vicinity of the Monon High Bridge the afternoon Libby and Abby were abducted and killed. During the first 30 minutes of the interview with former Delphi Police Chief Steve Mullen, Allen appears conversational and cooperative in talking to the investigators, but he becomes cautious when asked about what he was wearing the day of the murders and what became of the cell phone he was carrying that day, a cell phone police say they still can't find. Then, at about the 52-minute mark of the interview, it seems to dawn on Allen that investigators are questioning him like a suspect, and he says, "I don't want to be somebody's fall guy. I'm starting to feel like your main lead. You're not going to find anything to connect me to the murders, so I'm not worried about it." That's when detectives say they just want to look at Allen's car and his house. And that's when Allen says, quote, "I'm not going to have police going through my house and stuff." The interview became combative when Allen was shown a photograph of Bridge Guy and told his clothes that he wore that day looked the same way as the killer is dressed. Allen says, "If that's taken with the girl's phone, that's not me." Allen then added that a lot of people wear blue jeans and dark jackets, to which the investigator replied, "But not walking the bridge that day." At that point, Allen said, "We're done here, arrest me or take me home." And that's what detectives did, only to serve an Indiana State Police search warrant a couple hours later, when the gun investigators say that ties Allen to the unspent round found at the murder scene was recovered. When Allen was shipped off to the Westville Correctional Facility, a maximum security state prison, for his own safekeeping before the trial, that's when Warden John Gallipo told the jurors this afternoon that Allen filled out a piece of paper and it read, quote, "I'm ready to officially confess for killing Abby and Libby, and I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry." And that's represented here in a court-approved replica of that confession note. Gallipo also told the jurors that Allen told him that he disposed of a box cutter in a dumpster behind the CVS store where he worked here in Delphi. A pathologist who conducted the autopsy on the girls' bodies said their necks were slit with a sharp-edged blade, such as a box cutter. Live in Delphi, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 News. Well, good afternoon, Dan. You know, this is the second day in a row that jurors in this courtroom have either seen a videotape of Richard Allen protesting his innocence or listened to testimony that came from behind prison walls of Richard Allen admitting his guilt in the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German 7.5 years ago near the Monon High Bridge. It was nearly 2 years ago in October of 2022 when Richard Allen entered the Westfield Correctional Facility in solitary confinement. That's a maximum security state prison. After 5 months inside, he told his psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla, that he had found God and wanted to confess to the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German on February 13, 2017, near the Monon High Bridge east of Delphi. Dr. Walla testified that Allen told her in specific chronological detail that as a recovering alcoholic, he drank 3 beers that day, followed the girls onto the bridge, quote, messed with his gun, which is when he thinks a bullet fell out of that weapon, ordered the girls down the hill and sought to rape them because he thought 13-year-old Abby and 14-year-old Libby were between the ages of 11 and 18. He said he saw a van approaching that scared him. Then he forced the girls across Deer Creek, slashed their throats, but stayed with them long enough to assure himself that they were dead and wouldn't suffer, then covered them with tree branches and walked back to his car. Allen told the psychologist he had remorse and wishes he could change what happened, wanted to apologize to the families of the victims and his own family, and blamed his problems on child sexual abuse, both as a perpetrator and a victim. His exact quotes to the psychiatrist were, "I didn't do everything I said I did, but I killed Abby and Libby," and "I just want to sign my confessions," and "I need to let my wife go." In the afternoon session, Dr. Walla told the jury she diagnosed Allen with serious mental illness while he was in prison confessing to the murders, and that his mental health struggles began in April of 2023. About the same time, he was meeting with his attorneys and receiving legal documents and details of the case that was being built against him. And while she didn't know what information Allen was learning, the doctor speculated that his deteriorating condition and confessions could be due to guilt over the crime and the awareness of the future that he might face. Nick?
You know that Kathy Allen is in the courtroom there. What was her reaction to her husband's confessions?
Well, today there was no reaction because she's heard it before. She's heard it in multiple phone calls that came from him inside the prison in 2023. However, Dr. Wallace said it was later in the summer of 2023. She was listening in on a phone call between Allen and his wife, and she said at the time, "Stop confessing, hang up the phone." She hung up. Allen turned to Dr. Wallace and said, "She doesn't believe me." Nick and Dan?
All right, Russ, thank you. Of course, we'll stay on top of any new developments that come from the trial, and we'll have an update both on air and online as we continue to learn more.
And as heartbreaking details are revealed in this trial, it's important that we don't lose sight of what this is all about. These 2 girls who lost their lives far too soon, Abby Williams and Libby German, were 8th graders who went to Delphi Community Middle School. Abby was 13, Libby was 14. They were best friends, and they're leaving behind a heartbroken community determined to keep their memory alive. All right, Hannah, thank you. Right now, some breaking new information on the Delphi murders trial as court just wrapped up day 11 of testimony.
That jurors heard from a neighbor who owns property near the scene. Russ McQuaid joins us live from outside of Carroll County right now courthouse with the very breaking details. Hey, Russ.
Good afternoon, Nick and Dan. After a stumbling start to the prosecution's case over the last week, the state has scored mightily in its prosecution of Richard Allen, accused of the 2017 murders of Libby German and Abby Williams near the Monon High Bridge. Late this afternoon, it was revealed that an owner of a house on 625, County Road 625, which basically runs right there underneath the Monon High Bridge on the south side of Deer Creek, that's the location where investigators say Richard Allen, bridge guy, met the 2 girls, Abby and Libby, brought them down off the bridge, took them down a ravine, so to speak, to the creek side, where in confessions we heard recounted by a prison psychiatrist this afternoon, Dr. Monica Walla. She said in prison, Richard Allen gave her a step-by-step synopsis of how he met the girls, took them down, was down on the south side of the creek, intended to assault them there, but he freaked out when he heard a white van driving on a ridge on a road nearby. That is the driveway of Brad Weber, who lives down there. Brad Weber testified that he got off work at about 2 o'clock that afternoon. Takes him 20-25 minutes to drive home. He arrived home driving a white van up that road at about 2:30 p.m. Richard Allen had told in his confession that it was a white van that scared him. He took the girls to the other side of the creek, slashed their throats, said he stayed there long enough to make sure they were deceased and didn't suffer, then walked back up to his car that was parked on County Road 300 North. On County Road 300 North, a black 2016 Ford Focus was spotted right where Richard Allen said he parked his car. There's also testimony this afternoon. They did a vehicle search in Carroll County. Only one person owned a black Ford Focus Model SE in 2017. That would have been Richard Allen. So what the prosecution has managed to accomplish in the last couple days, they've brought in a crime spatter, crime scene expert who laid out how the scene where the girls' bodies was found, how the murder went down. They have brought forth a psychiatrist from the correctional facility who treated Richard Allen in 2023 who said he confessed. They also have indications that he was confessing to his wife over the phone. She told him to stop doing it. Then they also have his words, not only his confession, but also the testimony of a neighbor who said, yep, that was about the same time of day I was driving up in my white van, which would dovetail with Richard Allen's own account of why he panicked in the middle of that assault, because he saw a white van driving nearby and took the girls to the other side of Deer Creek.
Yeah, Angela, Daniel, good morning. Yesterday was a lot. Jurors heard testimony of the time Richard Allen reportedly admitted his guilt from behind prison walls. Now, his exact quotes to his psychologist, Dr. Walla, were, "I didn't do everything I said I did, but I did kill Abby and Libby." He goes on to say, "I just want to sign my confessions. I need to let my wife go." Now, these alleged confessions came a few months into his time in solitary confinement at the Westville Correctional Facility, a maximum security state prison. After 5 months inside the prison, Allen told Dr. Walla that he found God and wanted to confess to the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. Dr. Walla testified that Allen told her in specific chronological detail that he drank 3 beers that day and that he was a recovering alcoholic. Now, these next details are all according to the doctor, and we do want to warn you that they're extremely disturbing and graphic in nature. He told her that he followed the girls on the bridge and, quote, messed with his gun, and that's when he thinks the infamous bullet fell out. He then ordered the girls down the hill and was planning on raping them, but he saw a van approaching and that scared him. He then forced the girls across Deer Creek, slit their throats, made sure they were dead and that they wouldn't suffer, and then he covered them with branches and walked back to his car. Allen told the psychologist he had remorse and wishes he could change what happened. He also said he wanted to apologize to the victims' families as well as his own. Then during cross-examination, things get pretty contentious. The defense tore into Dr. Walla on the stand, questioning her credentials and interest in the case and true crime in general. Walla told the court she followed the case through podcasts and social media and that she even contributed to online platforms. She testified that she sometimes shared the information she learned online with Allen himself. In the afternoon session, she told the jury she diagnosed him with serious mental illness and that those struggles began in April of 2023. Now, that's about the same time that Allen began meeting with his attorneys about this case that was being built against him. She speculated that his unraveling in these alleged confessions could be due to those meetings and a new idea of what he could face in the future. Now, Walla no longer works at Westville, and we also learned that she never disclosed her interest in the Delphi case to her employer there. Now, as for today, the jury is expected to hear recordings of prison phone calls between Allen and his wife and mom as court gets underway at 9 a.m.
But on day 12 of the Delphi murders trial, jurors heard tapes of phone calls between accused killer Richard Allen and his wife, where he admitted to killing Abby Williams and Libby German in 2017. Thanks for joining us here first at 4. I'm Nick McGill.
And I'm Birshel Edmay in for Aaliyah. Well, jurors also heard how a detective determined Allen knew details about the murders that no one else would know. Fox 59's Russ McQuaid has been in court throughout the day and now has the breaking details.
Richard Allen's own confessions from inside a state prison were on full display for jurors today in Carroll County, as well as a detective's account of how he dug up a key piece of evidence against Allen that even the prosecutor didn't know about until 2 months ago. When Richard Allen was being held in a state prison in early 2023, 6 months after his arrest for the killings of Abby Williams and Libby German near the Monon High Bridge on February 13th of 2017, he made lots of phone calls to his mother and his wife. During those calls to Kathy Allen, his wife, Richard Allen said, quote, "I killed Abby and Libby." And Kathy answered, "No, you didn't." Says Allen, "I think I did." Says his wife, "They are messing with your mind." On May 10th, Allen told his wife, "I think maybe I've lost my mind. I need you to know I did this." Kathy Allen answers, "You are not well." A month later, Allen tells Kathy, "I did it. Do you still love me?" She answers, "Yes, dear, but you didn't do it. You can't call me and talk like this." On the witness stand was Indiana State Police Master Trooper Brian Harshman, who testified that it wasn't until this past August, 2 months before the trial, that he read a report written by a prison psychiatrist in August of 2023 that detailed Richard Allen's confessions to the murders, a step-by-step description of how the kidnapping and killings were committed, and a reference to a van that drove up a nearby country road that panicked him. So he took the girls across Deer Creek and killed them on the north side bank. Harshman told jurors that the van reference was new to him, so he tracked down a nearby homeowner, Brad Weber, who testified yesterday and confirmed for the jurors that he drove a white van and would have driven up that road to his driveway at about 2:30 p.m. on that day, which was about the time investigators say Allen was preparing to rape and kill the girls. The state's implication is Allen could not have known about the white van from police reports or information available to his attorneys because investigators didn't figure it out till some 15 months after he started making confessions. The defense counters that there were thousands of tips called in over the course of this investigation, and perhaps hundreds of them related to a possible sighting of a white van. In Delphi, Russ McQuaid, Fox 59 News.
Well, court is still in session in Carroll County, and the prosecution and the defense are pretty much at odds here over a video of Allen in the Cass County jail.
And the prosecution wants to show that video in court. The defense will raise an objection. The judge is now watching the video and deciding whether to allow.
The search for justice for Abby Williams and Libby German enters its next phase. Just a few hours ago, the prosecution rested its case against suspected killer Richard Allen. They believe they proved Allen is the bridge guy who killed the girls just before Valentine's Day in 2017. All of this comes exactly 2 years after Allen was handcuffed and sent to jail. And now Indiana's most high-profile murder trial has been turned over to the defense.
Yeah, they've already called their first witness to the stand after the state played phone calls between Allen and his wife earlier today. We turn now to Fox 59's Russ McQuaid and Max Lewis. And gentlemen, the defense started its case tonight with a woman who was there on the bridge the day Abby and Libby were murdered. What was that testimony all about?
Well, that started about 4 o'clock. There were a couple of women who testified. One who said she was up on the bridge between 3 and 4 p.m. on the day of February 13th, 2017, the day that Abby and Libby were killed. I think the defense was trying to prove she was up on that bridge. She saw and heard nothing unusual, which would have been approximately in the time frame when the murders may have been being committed. Down below, there was another woman who was brought up who said, earlier that day I saw a man who seemed sort of strange at the county road. That was accessing that end of the Monon High Bridge. When I looked back, he was gone. So the defense, Max, didn't really land any punches this afternoon. No. However, the prosecution wrapped up its case for these jurors by playing telephone calls that Richard Allen made to his wife and to his mother throughout the spring and summer of 2023.
Yeah, and a pretty big way to wrap up that case. They played these calls, and these are the sort of last set of confessions. We had heard the confessions to prison guards. We had heard the confessions to a numerous psychologists, and then we heard these. But these were obviously the only ones that we have heard coming out from Richard Allen's mouth himself. Some of the things he said, most of the confessions during these times, they were played from a selected amount of days, mostly through April and May of 2023. He basically said things like, I did it, I killed Abby and Libby. They were very generic confessions. His wife would say, no, you didn't, like, don't say that. And he would, say, yes, I did. He would also just talk about thinking that he was losing his mind. That was a couple of times he said those in those calls as well.
What struck me about those confessions he gave to his wife, they were rather generic and plain spoken, as opposed to the more complicated, more detailed confessions he gave to the prison psychiatrist later that summer.
Yeah, the prison psychiatrist, Dr. Monica Walla, who had testified previously, he told her a step-by-step account of what happened, that he was at the bridge, he laid in wait, he followed them across when he was getting ready to rape and kill the girls. Then he got spooked by a van, and that played a really key part in the testimony today as well.
Well, what we're trying to understand is, how would he have known about that van in August of 23? Was it in his paperwork? Was it with discussions with his attorney? However, the trooper, Brian Harshman, said, I didn't even know about that van reference until August of 24. 1 year after he made those comments, because it wasn't until the summer of 24, just a couple months ago, that we as investigators even knew about the van. That's when they brought in Brad Weber, the man who owns the van. He goes, yeah, I was driving my van down that road that day.
And around 2:30 that afternoon, which lines up with the timeline. Of course, the defense pushes back on the van thing, basically saying there are hundreds of references to the van in the discovery that Allen was provided before he made that detailed confession. But Brad Weber's going to play a huge part in this, and we know he's going to be back for the defense's case, because he says he would have arrived home around 2:30. But defense attorney Andrew Baldwin, when he was questioning him earlier this week, said, are you sure about that? And referenced a statement he made to law enforcement. That was before the prosecution objected, and Mr. Baldwin subpoenaed him to come back. That is likely when we might hear about where he actually was that day.
And Master Trooper Brian Harshman testified, I have listened literally to hundreds of hours of phone calls between Richard Allen and his wife. I know his voice. In my opinion, the voice of Bridge Guy on the bridge that day on Libby German's phone, guys down the hill, he said that is Richard Allen's voice.
Day 13 of the Delphi murder trial gets underway in less than an hour. The jury's going to hear more from witnesses that are now being called by the defense.
The prosecution rested its case Thursday afternoon, and the judge made a ruling on if Richard Allen's Google searches can be included in the trial. Let's go to Anna Darling. She's sharing the very latest. Anna?
Good morning, guys. Judge Fran Gull ruled that Allen's Google searches can be admitted and given to the jury, but they were not actually read out loud in court, and no witnesses testified about them. Our team did get a chance to look at them afterwards. Allen had searched a lot about disturbing movies where kidnapping and hostages were parts of the plot. He made numerous searches about the Delphi murder case in 2022 as well. As the prosecution called its last witnesses and evidence, the jury got to hear recorded phone calls from the defendant Richard Allen to his wife and mother. Indiana State Police investigator Brian Harshman told the jury he listened to approximately 700 phone calls from Allen in multiple phone conversations throughout 2023 with his wife. He admits to killing Abby Williams and Libby German. His wife responds that she knows he did not do it. During cross-examination, Harshman confirmed for him that Allen had been showing some bizarre behaviors while in custody. Now, the first two witnesses for the defense were two women who were in the area when Abby Williams and Libby German were killed on February 13th, 2017. One was out walking near the Freedom Bridge that day and remembered seeing an older and overweight man who did not say hello to her. The other was a neighbor who lived nearby who remembered seeing a man she did not know near her mailbox that morning. She said the man then walked down the road to the general direction of the Monon High Bridge.
Defense attorneys are now working to convince a jury that suspected Delphi killer Richard Allen should walk out of prison as a free man. Today, they gave jurors details of what Allen's life has been like behind bars. Witness testimony also zeroed in on the fact that none of them heard or saw anything actually happen to Abby and Libby on the Monon High Bridge in February of 2017. Fox 59 Trust McQuaid and Max Lewis are outside the Carroll County Courthouse with the very latest.
Day 13 is wrapped up here in the Delphi double murder trial of Richard Allen. The defense has taken center stage, trying to prove their client was mentally ill last summer, a year ago in 2023, when he confessed to his wife from behind prison walls that he killed Abby Williams and Libby German near the Monon High Bridge in 2017. A prison psychiatrist testified that she did believe he suffered from mental illness, but even someone who is faking mental illness can be mentally ill, but also at the same time slip a few truths into their conversation. After the lunch hour, then we moved on to searchers and we moved on to witnesses, which the defense is hoping to prove that because these witnesses didn't see Richard Allen on the bridge that day, that because the searchers did not see the bodies of Abby and Libby overnight in the dark in the woods, that maybe those girls were driven away. Max Lewis was in there in the late afternoon then when a couple of key witnesses came forward who were very instrumental in the early stages of this investigation.
Yeah, one of them being Steve Mullen, who we have seen take the stand numerous times so far in this case.
Well, he was the police chief in Delphi at the time of the murder.
That's right, and this is the first time, though, he's taken the stand when the defense has been presenting their case. So they were able to pepper him with quite a few questions. Ones that really stuck out to me, and they asked him about him, interviews of witnesses very shortly after the time the girls were murdered. All of those were recorded in some way, videotaped. Well, we learned today what we had known and confirmed, that several of those interviews, almost all of them, gone from the time this investigation started, February 14th, 2017, all the way up until March, late March of 2017. All interviews conducted during that time, gone. Then even more went missing, and a second round of interviews went missing between the summer of 2017. They were able to recover some of them, only the video, not the audio.
And then, of course, Sheriff Tobe Lesenby was leading the investigation here in 2017, and some of his past comments, which dovetail the prosecutor's comments from early on in this investigation, those were brought out before jurors.
Yeah, specifically the belief that more than one person had to have committed the murders of Abby and Libby just because of the complexity of the crime scene. He was asked initially on the stand how many people he believes committed the crimes. He sort of said, I don't remember. The defense gave him his deposition that he gave in August of 2023, just a little over a year ago, when they asked him that. And in that deposition, he said he believes 2 or more people had to have committed the murders. That obviously does not jive with the prosecution's theory at this point.
Ironically, the prosecutor, Nicholas McLeland, said at the time of the original probable cause that was published in October of 2022, November of 2022, after the arrest of Richard Allen, he said, I can't release more information, Your Honor, because I think there are more suspects out there. All of a sudden, 2 years later, that whole theory from the state that there are more suspects out there disappeared.
Right.
You sat in there, you watched that jury while Steve Mullen was up there testifying that, yeah, some of our interviews have simply disappeared into thin air. From body language, from any response, could you see any reaction from some of those jurors?
Yeah, there were a couple jurors in the front that were shaking their head just as they were taking notes, sort of shaking their head when Mr. Mullen, who is quite confrontational on the stand with the defense attorneys, when he was saying that he lost all these interviews and they're just gone. They were shaking their heads and basically sort of seemed to possibly buy the theory that the defense is putting forward, that there was sloppy police work done in this. However, there are some who really don't take notes, really don't take account of what the defense is saying. So it seems like there may be some split on the jury at this point.
Okay, this jury here's day 14 of testimony tomorrow morning, and we're understanding that Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter will be on the stand. For Max Lewis, I'm Russ McQuaid in Delphi. The prison videos are from April, May, and June of 2023, 6 months after Allen was arrested for the killings of Abby Williams and Libby German near the Monon High Bridge in 2017. And those videos coincide, say the defense, with their client's mental health breakdown behind bars. The state claims Richard Allen needed to be housed in solitary confinement for his own safety at the Westville Correctional Facility pending trial. Allen is accused of killing Abby Williams and Libby German on February 13, 2017, after abducting them off the Monon High Bridge, being interrupted in his plans to sexually assault the girls, then forcing them across Deer Creek and slashing their throats where the best friends' bodies were discovered the next day. After some legal wrangling back and forth, Allen's attorney succeeded in introducing video of Allen being moved in custody inside the prison. There are times he is wearing a spit hood over his head. He is naked and being dragged by guards while shackled and being scrubbed clean. Jurors have heard testimony that Allen was neglecting to take care of himself, smeared himself with feces, and had been stunned with an electric shock device to force compliance. Throughout the playing of the videos, the jurors remained attentive, simultaneously writing notes about what they were seeing on the screen. Out of respect for Allen's dignity, his attorneys are perhaps seeking to seal those videos from evidence. Therefore, they were shown only to the jurors and not to the gallery, where reporters had a limited view of the video screen. In Delphi, Russ McQuaid, CBS 4 News.
Russ, thank you. State Police Superintendent Doug Carter took the stand today as well for a short time. Carter was asked by Allen's defense attorney about the decision to kick the FBI off the case. Well, this was back in August of 2021 that Carter said he made the decision to relieve the agency of its involvement in the investigation and made them return all the materials they had gathered. The prosecution did not cross-examine Carter, and he was off the stand in less than 10 minutes.
Well, we'll start first at 4 with the jury now hearing all the evidence in the Delphi murders trial. This morning, the defense rested its case, and now both sides are preparing for closing arguments. Thanks for watching us here first at 4. I'm Nick McGill.
I'm Eric Graves in for Aaliyah. Soon the jury will deliberate the case of Richard Allen. He's charged in the 2017 murders of Abby Williams and Libby German in Delphi.
Fox 59's Russ McQuaid was in the courtroom when the defense and prosecution ended their cases. He joins us live now. Hey, Russ.
And a good afternoon. It was at 2:15 this afternoon in a courtroom on the 3rd floor of the Carroll County Courthouse when Special Judge Fran Gall turned to 12 jurors and 3 alternates and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you have now heard all the evidence in this case." Richard Allen stands accused of walking along the Monon High Bridge on the afternoon of February 13th, 2017, and stalking 13-year-old Abby and 14-year-old Libby, forcing them down the hill to Deer Creek and up the opposite bank, where searchers found their bodies the next day, fatally slashed across their throats. The prosecution says Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, the image of the killer captured on Libby's cell phone. And an unspent bullet from his gun was found at the crime scene, and it proves it. Today, an Indiana Department of Corrections psychiatrist testified that in the spring of 2023, when he visited Allen in the Westfield Correctional Facility in solitary confinement for his own safety, Allen was psychotic, but medication evened out his behavior, and that's when he said on June 20th, 2023, Allen said he wanted to apologize to the families of Abby and Libby for the killings. Dr. John Martin said on that day Allen was no longer psychotic. Then jurors watched a video of Allen in shackles in prison later that day undergoing a medical checkup when he seemed listless and staring ahead. The jury asked Dr. Martin if he thought Allen was feigning mental illness during that video, and the psychiatrist said no. Tomorrow we will start up to 5 hours of closing arguments, 2.5 hours per side. Then Judge Fran Gall will give the jurors the case. She will instruct them on the concept of reasonable doubt. If there is anything they have doubts about the presentation from the prosecution, that could be reasonable doubt to find Richard Allen not guilty. She will also instruct them to determine what they feel is the credibility, not only of the witnesses they heard on the stands, but also the credibility of Allen's own confessions on phone calls that were tape recorded and played for the jurors. Finally, she will instruct that jury to make no choice, no decisions about what they think regarding his decision to not testify in his own defense.
Yeah, Angela, Daniel, good morning. After 17 long days in court, all of the evidence has now been presented to the 12 jurors and 3 alternates here in Carroll County, and we are inching toward the final days of this trial here. I'm joined with Russ McQuaid, who is, as we know, has been following this trial every single day. He's been in the courtroom bringing us all of the latest. Good morning, Russ.
Good morning, Kit.
It's good to be here with you. Now, as we know, closing arguments are set for today. What do you expect both sides to bring to the table?
Prosecutor Nicholas McLeland goes first. He's got 2.5 hours to make his case. He'll probably use about 2 hours, an hour 45 of that this morning. He will say, one, you've heard from Richard Allen, the horse's mouth, in those phone calls from prison to his wife saying, I did it, I killed Abby and Libby, plus he told that to a prison psychiatrist. Two, we've got a bullet that we found at the crime scene. We tested it in the State Police Crime Lab. That proves that bullet came from Richard Allen's gun. It matches a gun that is in his house. It matches other bullets we found in that house. Three, Richard Allen knew something that only the killer would know, that there was a white van driving nearby, and he says it interrupted him during his attempted assault on the girls. There was testimony from a man who lives on a nearby road who said, yes, I would have been driving a white van up that road at that time. Four, we've got a photograph of what looks like Richard Allen's car, which would have been parked nearby the crime scene. Of course, Richard Allen admitted, yeah, I was up there walking near the Monon High Bridge that day. That's the prosecution. The defense is then going to come back. They also have 2.5 hours. They get to use all of their time before we go to lunch, probably about 1 o'clock this afternoon. The defense is going to say you can't take Richard Allen's word for it. He was in solitary confinement. The state's prison psychologist diagnosed him as suffering from psychosis. And under psychosis and solitary confinement, you're going to say anything. And that's why you can't take his words at face value. They were also inconsistent. Two, there is no DNA linking Richard Allen to the crime scene, nor any DNA found at Richard Allen's house or in his car from the girls linking him to that. They're also going to take issue with that bullet comparison. They're going to say the conditions under which the state police made that comparison were not an apples to apples comparison. They were an apples to oranges comparison. Then they're going to wrap it all up and say, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard from day one, from February 13th of 2017 until even, what day is this? Even Tuesday afternoon, that the state police and FBI investigation was incompetent, misleading, the ball was dropped, and you're not just hearing it from the defense. We've had police testify on the stand, go, yeah, we made a mistake on that. Yeah, we dropped the ball on that. Yeah, we didn't have the tapes, the videotapes have been erased on that. So you're going to wrap it up in a ball, because what you're bargaining for, you're trying to get those jurors to believe there's a reasonable doubt that Richard Allen did not commit this crime.
Right. 17 days full of loaded evidence from both sides. Now, following these closing arguments, we do know that the jury will receive instructions from Special Judge Fran Gohl. We have them in our hands right here. Can you lay out some of those?
What we have is the preliminary instructions that she started with last month. Her final instructions will be tuned up. They will be similar to this, and we will hear that in the courtroom this afternoon. However, she is going to say the concept of reasonable doubt means it doesn't have to be all doubt, but it has to be reasonable doubt. Use your common sense. And it puts the pressure on the prosecution, because it's a high bar the state has to clear to find a man guilty of a crime. And she's going to say if all things come out even, you have to give the benefit of the doubt to the defendant, the man who is on trial. You also have to consider the credibility of the witnesses and the testimony, and that includes not only witnesses you heard from the stand, but also Richard Allen in those videotapes you saw from prison. Do you find him believable? Do you find his version of this believable? You also cannot hold it against Richard Allen that he did not take the stand to testify in his own defense, which from the defense point of view, frankly, why would he? We've already got him on tape. You heard him in police interviews, and you also heard him in some of those phone calls saying, I didn't do this. So his side's been told. Then what we do is the judge reads those final instructions, gives it to the jurors. The bailiff is sworn in. He takes the jurors back to the jury room where they begin their deliberations. The deliberations begin with usually the picking of a foreman of that jury. Occasionally there will be a straw poll taken to find out the temperature of the room. Where does everybody stand? Then the jurors start going through, usually in a chronological order from the first witness on through, what they heard, what did you hear, what seems to not fit, what does fit, and then that's how we progress. I expect this is going to be a long deliberation.
I was just about to ask, when do you expect the verdict, in your opinion, to come in?
I don't think it'll come in today. I think it'll come in tomorrow. I think there is so much weighing on these jurors. And when you're covering a trial or watching it from the outside, you have to take a look at this and go, not based on what I know, based on what those jurors are hearing in that courtroom. I sat down and I wrote down all the questions that weren't being asked that I know about, and there's reasons. Were they overlooked? Was there no evidence to ask it? Was it a strategic decision to not ask that question? Put yourself in the shoes of those jurors, 12 people, good and true, from Fort Wayne, who have been bused halfway across the strait. They've been living at a hotel in Lafayette ever since the middle of October. Every time they have access to a cell phone, they've got to do it with a bailiff looking over their shoulder as they call their family. So put yourself in the shoes of those jurors. What are they thinking, and what have they been exposed to as they sit down with their notes and try to figure out, did this man kill Abby and Libby?
News first at 4.
Ultimately, it's 8 years later. I mean, we're here 8 years later. I never thought we'd be here today.
I want justice, really, at the end of the day.
The Delphi murders case is now in the hands of the jury. We're taking a live look now at the town that has spent nearly 8 years wondering who killed Abby Williams and Libby German. The trial of the lone suspect, Richard Allen, has now entered its final phase. Thanks for joining us here first at 4. I'm Nick McGill.
And I'm Eric Graves in for Aaliyah. The jury received the case at 1:25 this afternoon. It's been about 2 hours deliberating today. We have several reporters and anchors in Delphi right now. Fox 59's Beershell Edmay joins us live outside the Carroll County Courthouse with the breaking details from court. Beershell?
We just saw the jury leave here about half an hour ago, so they retired for the rest of the evening to their hotel. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, for the Delphi community, for these two families, they have waited 8 years for answers, searching for justice after these murders. And there's been so many twists, so many turns in this case. But 2 years ago, the Indiana State Police arrested Richard Allen, and they believe he is the bridge guy. So now the jury must decide whether to convict him if he is, in fact, the killer. Now, Richard Allen is accused of killing Abby Williams and Libby German. This was in 2017. The teens were found dead near the Monon High Bridge in 2017. Now, Allen faces 4 charges. He's charged with 2 counts of felony murder, which is causing someone's death while committing another crime. In this case, that other crime is kidnapping. He's also charged with 2 counts of murder. Now today, the state as well as the defense issued their final statements, the closing arguments, and in the courtroom was Russ McQuaid. Russ, you've been covering this for nearly the 8 years, 18 days in this trial. Now what happens next? What were you seeing in those closing arguments?
Well, we had a jury inside that courtroom, inside the 3rd floor here at the Carroll County Courthouse. They've been there for 3 weeks. They've heard from 60 witnesses. They've viewed between 200 and 300 pieces of evidence and information, and Special Judge Fran Gull told them this afternoon, in essence, it's all up to you. This is the courtroom where Richard Allen's fate has hung in the balance for almost 3 weeks. Carroll County prosecutor Nicholas McLeland told jurors that the witnesses' testimony and evidence points to one conclusion: Richard Allen is bridge guy. He showed jurors once again the killer stalking Libby and Abby on the south end of the Monon High Bridge as they desperately sought an avenue of escape. Richard Allen had a gun pointed at them to exert power, said McLeland, and that gun ejected a bullet found near the bodies that matched a gun found in Allen's house. He left behind his calling card, a bullet, the prosecutor told the jurors, and there's the cell block confessions from Allen while he was locked up in a maximum security prison awaiting trial. He gives you details only he would have, only the killer would have, said McLeland. But it was Allen's incarceration in solitary confinement for more than a year, resulting in psychosis, that bolstered the defense argument for a not guilty verdict. If somebody was bearing down on you for the murders of 2 girls, your response might be the same, defense attorney Brad Rosie told the jury. Solitary confinement is damaging to a man's brain. Rosie went after the Indiana State Police lab results that found a tested bullet found at the scene matched Allen's gun. The magic bullet is nothing more than the tragic bullet, he said, an example of bungled ballistics. And then investigators should have taken a harder look at a neighbor near the crime scene whose story had changed about what he was doing the day Abby and Libby died. When Judge Gull gave the instructions to the jurors, she said they must give weight to reasonable doubt, and if everything comes out 50-50 between the evidence of the state and then what the defense has presented, she says the presumption of innocence must go to the accused man. That jury, Beershell, deliberating for just 2 hours this afternoon. That's barely enough time to elect yourself a foreman and decide, okay, where are we going from here?
Now, keep in mind, the closing arguments, that's the time where they wrap up everything, and they're supposed to give the jury a lot to weigh in and figure out where do we move from here. So the 2 hours now, seeing how short of time they had, when you think back to the closing arguments, would you have expected it to be that short of time?
I would have expected they would have worked longer their first day, but I think it may be indicative of the fact that when you get back in that jury room, because they're admonished during the trial, you guys really shouldn't even be talking to yourselves until this is all over.
Right.
Even though you're living with each other at a hotel for 24/7 and you're on a bus coming over here. So I think it's indicative of the fact that they go back in that jury room, they sit down, they take a deep breath, it's all on us. Who wants to be foreman? And of course, everybody looks away until one guy
Someone
steps
has
up
to
and
say
says,
yes.
I'll do it. And it's like, okay, what do we do now? And everybody goes, I got 60 pages of notes. I got 30 pages of notes. Folks, we're going to need some time to figure out where we are in this thing. Let's catch our breath. Let's all go back to the hotel, get a good night's sleep. Everybody look at your notes. Let's really hit the ground running tomorrow morning. That would be my guess, as opposed to, let's say, an immediate verdict. In a trial this complicated, going on for 3 weeks, I don't think you're going to see a verdict in the first 2 hours.
Well, as much time as it takes, we know Russ McQuaid, as well as the rest of our team, will be inside that courtroom. But in the meantime, we also want to make sure we're centering everything here around these two girls, remembering Abby and Libby, who were killed here in 2017. As we've mentioned before, the two were best friends who were just on a hike on the Monon High Bridge, and we want to make sure that you can see their faces and really learn more about their stories. So over the years, the Delphi community has come together to honor their lives, their stories. Abby and Libby Memorial Park is now the most permanent way that honors them in Delphi. It was dedicated more than 3 years ago. Libby's grandparents say the idea started with a plan just to buy some bleachers for the girls' softball field. Now it is so much more than that. It's also a space for the community to remember and to gather. So as that happens, just know so many people here are taking time to honor these girls. Just right beside me are ribbons in their two favorite colors. We're going to continue to do the same here and make sure we stay on top of this case, as we've just mentioned.
The fate of the suspect in the Delphi double murder case is now in the hands of the jury.
After nearly 8 years of confusion, grief, and frustration, the city of Delphi now anxiously awaits a decision from the jury. Thanks for joining us tonight at 5. I'm Dan Spieler.
And I'm Nick McGill. The jury received that case at about 1:25 this afternoon, spent about 2 hours deliberating today.
We want to find out. We wait to find out now if they believe Richard Allen is the man who killed Abby Williams and Libby German just off the Monon High Trail in 2017. That is the audio clip that's been part of this investigation nearly the entire time. Now the trial has entered its final phase. Tonight we have several reporters and anchors there in Delphi, including Fox 59's Birchelle Edmay, who joins us live outside the Carroll County Courthouse with the latest details breaking today in court. Birchelle?
Just about an hour and a half ago, the jury left here. They have the case in their hands, so they've retired for the evening at the hotel, and we'll wait to see what they do tomorrow morning when they're back at 9 a.m. But for this community, somewhat on pins and needles right now. They've been waiting 8 years, essentially, for answers, asking questions. Why did this happen? How did it happen? And most importantly, who did it? Well, now we learned from Indiana State Police, they feel as if they have the bridge guy. They have their man for this case. 2 years ago, they arrested Richard Allen, who is the main and only suspect right now in this case. And right now, the jury will decide his fate. Now, Richard Allen is accused of killing Abby Williams and Libby German. The teens were found dead near the Monon High Bridge. This was back in 2017. Allen faces 4 charges. He's charged with 2 counts of felony murder, which is causing someone's death while committing another crime. That crime would be kidnapping when we talk about this case. He's also charged with 2 counts of murder. Now, today, the state gave their closing arguments, as did the defense, and inside the courtroom was our Russ McQuaid, who has been there all 18 days of this case and also covering it for nearly 8 years. So for the final moments there before the jury deliberated, what did you hear?
As the long haul to get to this day, Birchelle, 60 witnesses, 200 to 300 pieces of evidence and exhibits. And at 1:25 this afternoon, Judge Fran Gull turned to that jury and said, in essence, folks, it's all up to you. This is the courtroom where Richard Allen's fate has hung in the balance for almost 3 weeks. Carroll County prosecutor Nicholas McLeland told jurors that the witness testimony and evidence points to one conclusion: Richard Allen is bridge guy. He showed jurors once again the killer stalking Libby and Abby on the south end of the Monon High Bridge as they desperately sought an avenue of escape. Richard Allen had a gun pointed at them to exert power, said McLeland, and that gun ejected a bullet found near the bodies that matched the gun found in Allen's house. He left behind his calling card, a bullet, the prosecutor told the jurors. And there's the cell block confessions from Allen while he was locked up in a maximum security state prison awaiting trial. He gives you details only he would have, only the killer would have. But it was Allen's incarceration in solitary confinement for more than a year and resulting psychosis that bolstered the defense argument for a not guilty verdict. If somebody was bearing down on you for the murders of 2 girls, your response might be the same, defense attorney Brad Rosie told the jury. Solitary confinement is damaging to a man's brain. Rosie went after the Indiana State Police lab test that linked the bullet found at the scene with Allen's gun. The magic bullet is nothing more than the tragic bullet, he said, an example of, quote, bungled ballistics. And that investigators should have taken a harder look at a neighbor near the crime scene whose story has changed about what he was doing the day Abby and Libby died. When Judge Gall handed the case to the jury, she reminded them about the concept of reasonable doubt. They have to have not beyond all doubt, but reasonable doubt. Use your common sense when coming to this verdict. She also said you can consider a lack of evidence in this case, and you can't hold it against Richard Allen that he didn't testify against himself in this case. Bierschel, we were all surprised at about 3:25 this afternoon when we turned around here.
Yeah, and the vans were just going off.
We saw the vans leave, taking the jury back to the hotel in Lafayette. Now, that jury only met for 2 hours this afternoon. That could mean a lot. It could mean nothing at all. It could mean after 3 weeks testimony, I took a lot of notes. I watched them taking a lot of notes.
Right.
They just may need a night to sit back, look at their notes, gather their thoughts before they start doing some heavy lifting tomorrow morning.
And the likelihood is that they have already now assigned or picked out a 4-person. And then from there they decide, okay, how do we move forward? 9 a.m. is when we'll be back here. And as they review some of what was heard in those closing arguments, is there one thing that stood out to you overall in this trial?
In this trial, I think the thing that really stood out to me, and I saw the look on the jury's face, I mean, there's evidence yes, there's evidence no, pro and con, was just the quality of the investigation. Several times on the stand, investigators had to admit, we don't have that evidence, we taped over that evidence, we lost those interviews, we don't have this information. And there was a couple times I looked at the faces of the jurors and they were somewhat dismayed, expecting a full professional investigation to realize there were mistakes made over the years. And they said and both sides admitted, one of the biggest glaring missing pieces of this, there's no DNA evidence linking Richard Allen to those girls or to this murder.
Well, Russ, thank you. We know you're going to continue to follow everything inside of that courtroom for us. That includes when that verdict is heard.